Good morning, everyone. Let's try that again. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Perfect.
Hi guys, this is Donovan Brown. I'm a Senior DevOps Program Manager here at Microsoft. I'm responsible for the DevOps vision on top of Team Foundation Server and on top of Visual Studio Team Services. I could not be more honored than I am today to have with me Sam. He is not only a colleague and a friend, but he's also my mentor. So Sam, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey, I'm Sam Guckenheimer. I'm a product owner in Visual Studio Cloud Services. We do what you know as TFS, Team Foundation Server, Visual Studio Team Services, related services like Application Insights.
Yep. And everything else that kind of rounds out our dev story and our dev offering to our users.
That's correct.
Great. And I want to make sure, I'm going to say something really quick. I've been saying this at every conference I can. Team Foundation Server and Visual Studio Team Services is for any language targeting any platform. It is not just for .NET. So I'm going to go ahead and put that plug out there.
Oh, totally,
really early.
totally. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think one of the things we're going to talk about today, we're going to actually cover two topics with Sam. And people have been actually sending in questions on Twitter, so we're going to make sure and get to those questions as well. One of them is rugged DevOps, and the other one is DevOps anti-pattern. So first, I think we're going to go ahead and talk about rugged DevOps. So why don't you define what rugged DevOps is for everyone first?
Okay, well, rugged DevOps was coined, I think, by Gene Kim and Josh Corman about 4 years ago.
Okay.
And the idea is to bring together the notions of DevOps and security. For example, there's a Rugged DevOps Connect now that they do at the RSA conference.
Oh, okay.
And I spoke there last year. The problem that we have is, DevOps came about because development got really agile. And that led to the realization that, hey, we're doing potentially shippable increments.
But we can't ship it.
We really ought to be going to production. So let's include ops.
Right.
And that became DevOps. Well, the next pillar that is kind of isolated in most places is security. So we're doing this very fast deployment, very fast iteration, small batches in DevOps, but our security practices say, hey, you scan at the end of the release. We'll throw up issues, we'll generate a bunch of unplanned work, and we'll de facto screw up that cycle. So the idea of rugged DevOps, and some folks call this DevSecOps, was what if we bring security into that?
And when you say security, what are we talking about? Are we talking about pen test, code scanning, static code analysis? What is security testing?
Yes. So it's not just security testing.
Okay.
It's about securing the pipeline and the automation practices and the production environment.
So this includes who can and cannot approve gates, for example, right? And who has access to starter deployment? Because that's security too. Because if I'm the developer and I want to do something sneaky, I could start a release and then approve it myself. That would be a security hole.
Yeah.
Right?
So permissions are part of it.
Okay.
I would say they're not necessarily the hard part of it. Just getting role-based permissions down. They're bigger questions of if I'm consuming third-party components like open source. Okay. Are the components I am taking advantage of clean? Okay, are they good versions? Are there any known vulnerabilities? Okay, then, of course, if vulnerabilities are discovered, which happens all the time, think of Heartbleed, Ghost, whatever, right? How quickly can I remediate or detect and remediate all instances that are in production? Okay.
Interesting.
So the goal with DevOps is that you get a very fast loop for time to detect and time to remediate.
Absolutely.
Okay. Don't you want that for security too?
I want it for everything.
Exactly. Okay. Yet, if you look at the practices that are used with security today, it's typically on a slower cycle, and it's more about hardening, and it's more about protecting the perimeter and so forth, as opposed to saying, boy, we need to get as infinitesimally fast on time to detect, time to remediate, and as good at protection and anomaly detection and all of these other steps that DevOps is supposed to help with. We need to get as good at that for all the security vulnerabilities and all of the attacks that we face as we are at just pushing code out.
Correct.
Okay, that today has been a really disconnected discussion.
Gotcha. So I'm sure the next question that I'm going to be asked is, so what's Microsoft doing about it, right? So that's what we're here as product group, as product managers. We're going off and figuring out, okay, we now have this problem of people, and I completely agree. I think the fact that we've gotten so good at producing value has just exaggerated why DevOps is so important, because we're producing value yet we can't deliver it. A lot of people are just failing to deliver it. And what you're pointing out is those that are succeeding to deliver it are delivering it and sometimes becoming more vulnerable because of it, because they're not thinking about that. So what are we on the VSTS team, or I should say team services team and team foundation server, how are we going to go and try to address those?
Well, let me start with a broader question. What are we Microsoft doing about it? Okay. So the first thing we're doing, of course, is making Azure the most secure place to work and deploy. And we're continually upping the bar in terms of our own compliance and certification. Same is true for team services as a service on top of that. So that's why we've gone for things like SOC 2 compliance, ISO 27001, and so forth. Now, the Azure is going hard on operational security with Azure Security Center. We in Team Services are going hard on working with partners to enable a process that includes secure package management, okay, so that you know what you're consuming, so that you can have security built into the release pipeline, so that you can have a build task or a build definition encompassing that task that will, scan your code, so that you can, in turn, use similar tooling in release to audit what is actually flowing out into production as part of that.
Gotcha.
Okay, so that's the path we're going now. There are a bunch of very good players who've been focusing on parts of that pipeline. So companies like White Source and Black Duck and come to mind in terms of scanning components coming in.
Okay.
There are a bunch of people who've specialized in static analysis for security scanning. So you take companies like Checkmarx or HP Fortify or Veracode, and that fits in with what you produce. Okay, and then many of them will then audit as well what flows into production or do dynamic scanning on the sites you produce. So we're working on all the angles of that.
So we're going to be producing extensions possibly that you'd be able to add onto your pipelines. You'd be an extension.
Yeah. So look for a number of extensions in the marketplace and look for some guidance on where those play, how those come in.
Yeah, we'll make sure. A lot of people aren't aware yet because we're working on it now as the DevOps Atlas. You might have seen some emails going around where we're building this thought leadership in this site, this pointer. I go and I do these demos, and people love the demos, and then they ask me, so Donovan, where do I go to get started? And I don't have a really good place of pointing them, and I got tired of saying I don't have a good place. So we're going off and we're building that content for you guys, and we'll make sure that we have some articles. Maybe we'll get you to author some of them for Rugged DevOps for us on that side as well.
Yeah, and I've got a linked area that's coming on visualstudio.com.
Perfect.
For what we do at Microsoft and how we practice.
Perfect. Yeah, because we do have the one story of how we've actually gotten to this cloud cadence that we're on today, too, which is a great document. If you haven't read that, I highly encourage that you read that, too. So why don't we answer some of the questions that were asked via Twitter today. So, and if you guys do want to ask, I have some, like Aaron's coming on for planning. We have Thomas from the Hockey App team coming on from Mobile DevOps. So we have some future shows coming. And if you want to have some questions answered there, just go ahead and use hashtag DevOps interviews, and then I go comb that hashtag and answer the questions. So some of the questions we got was, has Rugged DevOps come about just to placate security professionals who are uncomfortable with adopting DevOps?
It's not about placating security professionals.
So. Exactly.
Okay, so the security issue is real. We have a saying here, for example, assume breach. That means that unlike in the 5 or 10 years ago when your security strategy was protect the perimeter, build thicker and higher castle walls to keep the bad guys out, assume they have found a backdoor in. So that frequently these days is through social engineering. They use spear phishing. The most famous breaches with data exfiltration, like the U.S. government Office of Personnel Management, Sony, Target, what have you, all started with some form of social engineering to get credentials either from an employee or from a contractor of a target organization.
Gotcha.
And it was all done in a very sort of invisible way. So the attack would start with careful reconnaissance of where the vulnerabilities are, and then maybe through watering holes or something like that, they would get to a set of compromised credentials, and through those be able to thread their way into the corporate network, and then plant themselves in there and do reconnaissance from the inside.
Gotcha.
And plant command and control servers on the inside that they could use to exfiltrate data.
Gotcha. So, and a lot of us were naive in thinking that as long as, like you said, we don't let them in, then we're okay. So the security on the inside is always a lot more laxed, right? You can get to things a lot easier. And that's a fallacy because they're already on the inside is the way you need to be working. So even if I'm on the inside, getting to sensitive data should not be trivial. It should not be easy. I should have to authenticate who I am and verify that I have access to that data.
Yeah, how often have you heard, oh, this is just test data?
Well, a lot. And that funny thing is that test data used to be production data, and they just took a backup and restored it, right? And that data is like really sensitive information. So I know a lot of people that I have to, when I was a consultant, I would have to slap their hands and like, that's not really test data.
Or maybe it's, passwords.txt.
Exactly,
right?
Yeah, no one's going to find that. It's so obfuscated.
So we just say assume you're breached.
Gotcha.
Assume they're inside. Assume that you have attackers who are already sitting inside your network, and they may be there lying dormant. They may be there doing reconnaissance, but you have to get them out. So it's not. So going back to the question, it's not about placating security. It's about a new type of defense. Now, one of the best types of defense is don't have a stable network. So if you have a static network, then you're creating places for attackers to hide.
Okay.
Okay. If you're constantly reprovisioning and refreshing, then it doesn't matter if they set up a
You want to wipe
server
it out in a second anyway.
there. Today it'll be gone with the next deployment.
Gotcha.
So
Part of that still makes me a little nervous, right? Because if that's my attitude, to me, you haven't fixed the problem, right? You just fixed the symptom. And if I know the vulnerability exists, well, I just know tomorrow I have to redeploy it again.
yeah, totally. You should not be allowing known vulnerabilities to exist.
Yeah, and just wipe
But
it
how are you going to discover known vulnerabilities? You're going to discover known vulnerabilities through really good anomaly detection and
Sure.
telemetry, and you're going to fix them.
Right.
Okay? What you should not do is assume
That you're safe.
that you're safe because it's on the inside.
Gotcha.
Okay? Once they're on the inside, you're very vulnerable. And I mean, and the record is that one of the easiest paths in these days is social engineering. So we need to embrace security and embrace it throughout. I mean, a simple example that we live is multi-factor authentication.
Ours has been on the tip of my tongue too. I mean, it feels like it's such a burden on us to have to do that and constantly have my phone. But then if you realize how safe we are now because of that, right? It's a small price to pay.
We're safer.
Yeah, safer. Yeah, but it's really a small price to pay, right? We've made that as convenient as we can with a quick app and you're back in there. But I have to tell you, sometimes I do get frustrated, but then I always revert back to, if we didn't do this, I mean, something really, really bad could happen, right? So this is a small price for me to pay to make sure that everything's safe.
Yeah, something really bad still can happen.
For sure.
But
we're mitigating that. We're trying to reduce the odds of that
it's
happening.
making it harder. It's making it harder on a daily basis.
Right, and we're constantly having to go back in and figure out other ways to make sure that we're safe, because they're always trying to figure out other ways that they can go in and take advantage of us.
Right. As a defender, as a defender, you need to be right all the time. As an attacker, you only need to be right once.
That's pretty powerful. Scary, but true. All right, so let's go back, and obviously we've kind of touched on this already. So what tooling Microsoft have in place to ease the adoption of rugged DevOps? I think
so I think that we are we've got great release management now.
I agree.
And we have a really good pipeline. We are working with the partners who have specialist services so that they will have extensions that plug into that.
Yeah, so I think the marketplace is going to be key. Yeah, it's going to be key in helping us fix this, because we're never going to be able to create everything that you need, but we will be able to integrate with those who have. And that's what I think is really, really powerful about our new offering, is that people always ask me, Donovan, can you do X? I'm like, is there a command line interface or a REST API that does X? And the answer is yes, because if you show me either one of those, I will show you how I can use it in our build and our release system this very instant. Without any extensions, with nothing. I have everything in the box that I need to do that. And what we're going to do over time is polish that experience to make it just easier and easier for you to do. But if there is a command line or if there's a REST API, we can literally exploit it today. Right? And that's what I mean. Any testing framework, anything you want to do, just show me a command line or a REST API, and I'll show you how to do it with our system. So I love the fact that we can do that, and I love the fact that our our marketplace is growing so fast, because I go there all the time. I've published some extensions, and I kind of like to see who else is coming in there and what cool value that they've just added to the system. So it's fantastic.
Yeah.
Right. Cool. What else do we have here? There's been gaps in security auditing around TFS in the past. What is VSTS and on-premises TFS doing to address this? I'm not sure specifically what they might be referring to.
So where we have not been great is in providing self-service auditing.
Yeah, I've been asked that all the time. Donovan, how can I track down exactly who's ever touched this piece of code, because I'm about to get SOX audited? Right. That kind of stuff.
Right. So we, in doing SOC 2 compliance and ISO compliance and stuff like that, we've demonstrated that we have all of that capability in the data and in-house. We need to get better, and I think the question's fair, at providing self-service auditing for customers. We're doing some of that improvement as we're taking enterprises and onboarding them to the cloud. So there's a lot of work that's gone around looking at everything people do with process customization, everything they do with identities, and having tooling for that and diffing for that. It needs to be stitched together a little bit better.
Right, because I think my answer a lot of times for customers at the past was, the data's in there, right? I can tell you that, but getting to the data was really painful, right? The queries you'd have to run, or the reports you'd have to write, or you have to go down to the API and write some custom code to go find out that answer to that question that you had. And so that's one thing I always say, well, the data's in there, right? But getting the data out, we had to do a better job. So okay, great. Now this one's a little bit longer, so let's get this one here. It says, one of the 7 habits of rugged DevOps is discarding detailed security roadmaps. That sounds like something that would make chief security officers and leadership in information security organizations block the approach immediately. What have you talked to these people in leadership positions through to gain confidence in the approach and the others that take this guidance?
Okay, so first of all, I think that's a reference to Amy DiMartini's report.
Okay.
And talk, 7 Habits of Rugged DevOps.
Okay.
So she's a Forrester analyst.
Okay.
She did this talk at Rugged DevOps Connect that I mentioned earlier.
Okay.
And she's written at least 1 paper on this. I don't know if she's written more than 1. So and I think she's being quoted a little bit out of context.
Okay.
So the practice she refers to is, instead of relying on just detailed security roadmaps, do incremental improvement in small batches. Okay, so and the example she cites, one of the examples she cites is the Office of Personnel Management, which lost, 20 million some government employees' credentials and identities, social security numbers, and things like that. Had a very detailed security roadmap in place, but they weren't doing incremental inspection. They didn't have effective anomaly detection, and they were subject to an attack that we believe began with spear phishing. So was again a case where the attacker got inside, was unnoticed in static infrastructure, managed to embed servers inside the target's network, in this case the U.S. government, and exfiltrate data on an ongoing basis. And so the point is that you need to work in a loop. Boyd's OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, act, or if you like Deming, plan, check, do, act. But work in a very tight loop. And Boyd, had this great saying that he was a fighter pilot in the Air Force, and he said, your goal is to get inside your adversary's OODA loop. Well, that's totally clear in security. So you need to be able to get inside the attacker's OODA loop so that you can observe the attack as it's happening, push out the infiltration, protect the data, block any actions like lateral movement across the networks, block any misuse of credentials, roll the secrets, all of these things that will make it that much harder for an attacker to be persistent. So you need to do this in a continual loop.
Gotcha.
And making security continuous is part of the idea here of making DevOps rugged.
All right. Well, yeah, I still have a lot to learn there as well. Because I remember the first time you brought this to me, when you described it, I had a completely different picture in my mind of what it was supposed to be. And then you and I had another chat about it. And that's why I thought if it took me 2 times to get it, maybe we should have an interview over it. And maybe people can watch this a couple times and it'll sink in. But it's much clearer now on what the goals are of that particular initiative. And I know that we have a platform upon which we can build a really amazing DevOps offering there. All right, so if there's nothing else you want to say on rugged DevOps, we're going to switch to the other topic that we kind of wanted to cover, which this came out of, I did this really weird talk in Dev Days. They wanted me to do 3 talks. I didn't have time to prepare 3 talks. So I did 2, and I said, I'll give you 45 minutes. Ask me anything you want. Yeah, just like literally, it's just going to 45-minute Q&A. You can ask me whatever you want. And I was afraid no one would show up. But a lot of people showed up, and we actually ran over time, right? We had that many questions, which was great. And one of the questions was, Donovan, you've been here all weekend. You're telling us what to do. What are we not supposed to do? I thought that was a really interesting question. Someone's asked me, what should I not do when I want to go to DevOps? And my first response was, stop asking for permission. Right? Stop asking for permission to do the right thing for your company. Right? If you don't have a CI build, just go put one into your pipeline. If you don't have unit tests, just go write the unit test. When you go to someone who's been doing it the same way for 30 years with no CI and no unit tests and try to convince them that you need to slow down to do this stuff, they're never going to give you permission to do that because to them it's not broken. We're one of the largest X companies in the world doing it the way we've been doing it for 30 years. Stop trying to convince this person that that's a good idea. Just go do the right thing for your company. And then the benefits will, in my opinion, speak for themselves because lower issues, faster time to delivery. You have to pay something up front. But what other things? Oh, first of all, I'm curious, do you agree with that? Or would you completely say, oh my God, I would never do that?
Well, so I certainly agree with the examples you have. Okay, continuous integration, unit testing, just do it.
Yes.
I think you need to, in a DevOps world, pay attention to things you may not have been paying attention to as carefully before. So, for example, technical debt.
It's a big one.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you have a pile of technical debt, it's going to throw up unplanned work. And that unplanned work is going to bite you in the form of live site incidents, outages,
slowed velocity,
single points of failure,
absolutely.
all sorts of stuff that you do not want. And so you need to be quite conscious of technical debt, and you need to be quite conscious that we're going to reserve part of our backlog and part of our capacity for engineering improvement.
Right.
And that engineering improvement is going to help us be cleaner and be faster. So you optimize for speed and predictable speed, and through that you'll get the benefits.
Right. What I've noticed is that until I have numbers, though, having a conversation like the one that you just described goes nowhere. Right. I can beat up and down and yell and bang my chest that I need more QA. I need these people. And I remember they would never give me the resources that I needed until I went back one sprint once and I calculated how many estimates that we have for development work. And then I got my QA team to estimate how long they thought it was going to take them to actually test that work. And the numbers are so gigantically off. And I finally had the numbers, and then I got the resources that I needed. And I think tools like SonarQube are finally going to allow me to have the numbers that I need to go have that conversation with someone who doesn't even understand what technical debt is. Do you think that's fair?
I think that's fair. I mean, I think you just hit on two anti-patterns, actually. One is trying to optimize for cost.
Right.
Okay, and the other one is not understanding the value stream. So if you try to optimize for cost, the classic with less part of the argument, then you're going to say, hey, what's here that's expensive that we don't need to do?
Testing.
If you optimize for speed, on the other hand, so that your mindset shifts from what can we do to reduce mean time between failure to what can we do to reduce mean time to detect and mean time to mitigate, then you'll get the cost benefits. But you'll get them by making the pipeline more rugged. You'll get them by improving the speed, and you'll discover that using techniques like automated deployment, automated testing, exposure control, all of these things allow you to take on risks that you otherwise would never have taken on before, because you're thinking about that speed. You'll get the benefits back here.
Go ahead.
Okay, the second part of that, which was implicit in your question, was that you weren't looking at the value stream as a whole. In other words, what does it take for us to get from idea to code working in production? Or what does it take us to get from a live site incident to a mitigation and root cause remediation running in production? So those kinds of cycles are really important. And how many steps and how many handoffs are there in between? Okay, if you don't focus on that entire value stream and what do you need to do in the whole, then you're going to get tuned into a silo in the middle, ignoring the handoffs around it. Well, if you're going around all the time, what matters is the transition time, not the time in the silo.
Gotcha. I've heard this statement a lot, and you make it a lot too. It's about mean time to detection, and unfortunately, I've heard some people come back and challenge me on like, well, does that mean the developers are just going to like reduce their quality, throw it into production, and wait for production to tell them that it's broken? Right? It seemed like they almost use that as an excuse to do less engineering up front because we're going to be able to fix it really fast. So let's just fail fast and throw garbage out into production. But I hear people interpreting that way, but it's clearly not what you're trying to say.
No, not at all. So if you're using production experience, and you have the telemetry in production, then you can harden your testing based on what actually happens in production. And you can automate more. Now, what you need to automate, you of course need to automate testing. You need to automate it at the lowest level. So in other words, not rely on UI clicks, for example, to find bad data, but really look at the interface contract. Is it subject to appropriate data safeguards, or going back to security, have we introduced their vulnerability for cross-site scripting because we're not guarding the input? Okay, all of that testing needs to be highly automated in the pipeline, and the testing should be the contract. So I
Fair enough.
commit new code, or I make a pull request before then. Does it pass the tests that are there? Okay, and then
Right.
does it pass the next stage of testing in the pipeline before release? It shouldn't be a judgment question about whether it'll work. Now, the place for experimentation, which is where you were going with the question, is that we're doing stuff all the time. And, you know, in the days of Agile, we had this idea, oh, we'll let the product owner figure out the business value, right? And tell us what the right stack rank is for the backlog. Well, you know, we're not as smart as our customers. And so you have to sort of assume that you're going to be a third of the time and wrong a third of the time, and a third of the time it's going to make no difference. If you are with me on that, then you say, well, what we want to do is we want to get as many little increments out to at least exposure control, so a suitable subset of usage, so we can test whether they're the right things.
Because this is A/B testing and things like that.
It's A/B testing, and it's feature flagging,
Right.
and it can be just trying a new enhancement against, so doing a treatment against a control in any form.
Okay.
Okay, all of these are valid, and you need to get the data back from that. So does it make the positive difference against the hypothesis we had for the change
Right.
we're trying to make? And if it does, do more.
Right.
If it doesn't,
You
do
need-
less.
Exactly. It's the whole inspect and adapt.
So that's not throwing poor quality out there.
Okay.
That is using the hypothesis to determine what the experiment is against which you want to collect data in order to get the validated learning of what more to do.
Perfect.
And that is independent of keeping a good pipeline. And of course, if you don't have good performance, if you don't have great availability, if you don't have great security, none of that works, because all of the experimental results are polluted by the poor qualities of service.
Gotcha.
So you need to get rid of the technical debt. You need to have great automation. You need to have a clean pipeline. You need to be able to move fast, and you need to work in these small batches that let you collect lots of learning frequently.
All right.
Or as Boyd said, get inside your adversary's OODA loop.
I remember I was challenged at TR once. Someone came up behind me after and says, Donovan, I'm confused. I thought DevOps meant no manual testing, right? And I kind of looked at him like, no, we want to automate everything that we can. I don't necessarily mean that it means you're going to automate everything always, because in the example that I gave them was, let's just imagine that you have a user interface on an application, and it has a button in it, and that button says OK. And you have to localize that button into 11 different languages. OK is going to be of varying lengths in every language. And it's really hard for a computer to tell me, yes, you localized it correctly, and the button stretched long enough and had the right and it looked good to me, right? It said, a human being's going to need to look at that and tell me not only that we translated it, but that it actually fit the screen. So as soon as there's a user interface, my knee-jerk reaction is I want a human being to look at that user interface and make sure it looks good. So our pipeline needs to be mature enough such that it automates everything that it possibly can, and then can pause until I go in and do whatever that validation I feel needs to be. It could be running exploratory testing, it could be running some UI testing, and then I push the button that says it's okay to go forward. And the only time I can ever imagine you having a 100% automated pipeline is for an API, maybe a REST API. There is no user interface. I can test the exact 100% of that without ever seeing a user interface. That's the only time I can imagine you wouldn't have manual testing. How do you feel about that?
I'll repeat a great story I heard from Etsy.
Okay.
you know, and Etsy is like a poster child for DevOps, right? So they had an experience where someone changed a CSS file that controlled how all these web pages were displayed. And they put it through all their stages, passed all the automation, no problem, pushed it out. And they then started noticing that there was this decline in new user sign-up. And that's really interesting. So they started looking at the new user sign-up experience. Well, it turns out that that CSS change had meant that the text in the button, the confirm button for sign me up, I want to register for the site, the text and the background color of the button became the same. So they were effectively asking people to push a blank button. Now, no one inside Etsy went through new user sign up because they were already all registered.
Exactly. And your automated testing will click the button because it knows to click that button regardless if it can see it or not.
Exactly.
Exactly. So for anyone who thinks that you're going to be able to completely get rid of that, we're not there yet. Maybe one day we have software that's smart enough to realize that was there. Or
this is an argument both for exploratory testing and for exposure control. So you want you want to see with a small cohort of users what the impact of the change of every change is before it goes broad.
Right. And we do that with our rings of deployment for all, we do that with all of those, our scale units. Now you mentioned two things to me that I think are like A/B testing and feature flagging. To me, they're not mutually exclusive, right?
No.
Okay, good. Okay, yeah. So when you said them that way, I wasn't sure if that's what you were implying, because I would use feature flags to be able to turn it on just for a few people and then turn it off for the other people.
Yeah, so typically when people talk about A/B testing,
or blue-green, or those are synonymous?
Blue-green deployment is a little bit different.
Okay,
let's run through all of those.
Okay.
So the most common use of A/B testing is that you have alternate versions of a web page, okay, with a change, and you look at the conversion or revenue or whatever metrics from the two, and you say, which one's better, okay? Now, you can do this for things that are deeper than web pages, of course. It's not done that frequently. The idea of feature flags is that you, anywhere in the code, register a flag so that your code is always deployed and the flag is down, and you only raise the flag to a select group of identities as you need to, and you can raise it and lower it in production. And there are a few mechanisms for this. LaunchDarkly is a good partner we have who offers this as a service. So this can be used for assessing the treatment against the control, whether it's multiple changes at once or one change at once or what have you. And then blue-green is a deployment approach which says I keep version n hot as I deploy n+1. Right. If I see a problem in n+1, I kill it and revert to n.
Gotcha. It's not really an experiment as much as I'm not comparing these two. I'm trying to roll this out safely, and if I see trouble, I simply pull it back. Where A/B testing is, they're both working. I just want to see which one I believe is working better, not necessarily a deployment mechanism as an experiment that we're trying to run.
Yeah, so they're all slightly different technical implementations that allow you to do comparisons of what's happening in production.
Right, and an interesting story, to go back to the Etsy story you gave, the fact that they determined that there was a degradation in new sign-up meant that they had monitoring in place.
Right.
Which is a key point that people need to understand, as well as that I always say that DevOps for me is taking that idea and monitoring that idea in production. Not just pushing it into production, but monitoring it in production. Understanding, did I truly deliver value? And I don't know that if I just copy files and then run away from those files. I need to see, did people find it? Are people using that new feature? Are they able to perform that activity quicker than they did before? Because delivering value isn't changing my application always. It could just be upgrading my infrastructure. And I can still deliver value because the amount of time it takes to check out now is much shorter and more people are now doing it. So I found that it's taking that idea and monitoring that idea. And a lot of people lose the monitoring side, right? They haven't even implemented it yet, and they're just happy that they're quickly pushing code into production, which I think it could be dangerous. Even for back to the rugged DevOps stuff. You're quickly pushing stuff out there, but you don't know if what you're pushing out there is safe, or if you've had the button in the background be the same color and people aren't clicking it because you're not monitoring what you're actually doing. So
Yeah, I'd go a step further.
Okay.
I'd say that the new definition of done is that your new software is deployed and collecting the data, or your environment's collecting the data, that is sufficient to determine the validity of the hypothesis that was behind the new deployment.
or help you reject it if it weren't, right?
Right.
Okay,
So
yeah,
so
whatever.
it'll substantiate or diminish the hypothesis.
Absolutely.
But the point is, you need to have sufficient telemetry or monitoring to collect the data that will let you make the data-informed decision about what you just deployed.
Right.
And you're not done unless that data is coming through.
And I've had a lot of people get confused on telemetry versus logging, right? So a lot of people are like, so what should our telemetry look like? And I was like, well, it depends on what question you're asking, right? I can't tell you that. There's no go to chapter 5 for feature X telemetry, right? I mean, depending on the feature that you're deploying, there's obviously questions you're trying to answer, and you need to put in enough telemetry, not logging necessarily, but telemetry that says, is this feature being used? Maybe I want to know how much money is in a shopping cart before it gets abandoned. Maybe I should have given them a coupon or a promo code that might have been able to turn that cart into revenue versus them abandoning it because the number got so big and scary that they abandoned it. So the telemetry that you collect there is different. It's definitely different than logging, right? For I want to figure out why my system's crashing.
Well, it's not an either or; it's a both and.
Okay.
Okay. And I think the core issue here is, what is the latency between the real-time experience and your use of the data?
Okay.
Okay. So and for what scenarios? All right. So if you are looking at live site health, you want it to be instant. If there's, a problem in the Brazilian data center, you want to know within milliseconds.
Right.
Okay? Now, when you identify that there is a problem, you next need to gather up enough stuff to do troubleshooting.
Correct.
And that's where you may be looking at server logs, you may be looking at other telemetry, you may be gathering a trace
Right.
that takes you back.
Right. What I think I find customers doing is they're putting their logging in their telemetry. I don't think those are the two same buckets of data.
No.
Exactly.
So you want to get the very fast data for real-time observation. You want a very thin, efficient data pipe.
Right.
That may lead you to gather more data that you will then go work your way through. So, for example, here we use what's now Application Insights Analytics.
Right.
Internally, we call it Custo.
Custo, yeah.
So Custo's ingesting, I looked at this last week, about 800 terabytes a day on the services monitored in Azure, including tons of logs, tons of data, what have you. And people will get from the live site alerting an indication of what to look at from the Custo data, and then we'll be able to do all sorts of ad hoc querying on it. Okay, and pinpoint a cause, right?
Gotcha.
Or they'll use this to get to live site. But you want this very efficient stream to tell you there is a problem, it's there, and then you can go deeper.
Gotcha.
Now the other thing is that we talked about is usage, where typically you're looking at data that should be current but doesn't need to be real time.
Right.
So in other words, it doesn't really matter that you know usage as of 5 seconds ago. It does matter that you know it over the last week,
Right.
up to some reasonable threshold,
Gotcha.
and you do want to do historical comparisons on it, but you don't care in that usage data about the log level data and stuff
Right.
like that beyond the last week or last month or what have you.
Perfect. All right. So one other thing I want to double click on feature flags one more time, because you can also use feature flags to hide a feature that's not done yet.
That's right.
Right, which is a lot of people are doing. I'm going to talk to Aaron about planning, and I know feature flags will come up there too. Is that you put the feature behind a flag immediately,
Yeah,
and then
exactly.
if it takes more than a sprint to do, then you don't want to cherry pick your changes. You just leave that flag off, you push it into production. It's no harm, no foul, because no one can see it. And when you're ready for people to see it, you can then lift that flag. Right?
Yeah. So the great thing about feature flags is that in the old days, if Aaron or anyone else wanted to work on something that, would take longer than a sprint, the answer was, go create a branch. Right? And then you're off in your branch for 3 months, and you come back, and you try to merge, and everything's on the floor for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Right? So this avoids that merge debt because
Absolutely.
the code is always together. And you, instead of that, you're merging continuously in tiny increments when the code is fresh, and you don't have any merge conflict, and then you control exposure in runtime to determine how well things are fitting for your users and for everything else.
So when do you go back and finally remove the flag? Because that does not become technical debt. Your cyclomatic complexity goes up because you have these if statements everywhere. All of them, it's always revolved to true now because we are turning on all the flags that feature's done. I mean, you now have to go back in at some point and pay the price to clean all that up, don't you?
Yes, you do. You do need to clean them up at some point.
Gotcha.
And that's an every now and then thing.
Gotcha.
It's not a huge problem.
No, and I think it's a small price to pay for what it gives you.
Right.
Like you said, merge conflicts they're the bane of branches, right?
Right.
That's the cost of a branch, is the fact that you potentially have a merge in any source control system, right? You want to get back into master as quickly as you can so that you don't have that merge conflict. So we're going to wrap up here in a little bit, but there's a couple questions I had that came to me last minute was, where's does DevOps not a good fit?
Right.
And one of the examples was desktop apps, but to me, I don't see why I would not apply these same principles to a desktop app as well.
Well, increasingly, we've been doing that. We've been putting much better telemetry in Visual Studio, the IDE.
Yeah.
We have been following these practices for that. You take the Office apps, same thing.
Right.
So I don't think that's the fact that it's on a desktop or a laptop. I don't think is a constraint on the desirability. Sometimes it's just hard to do.
Agreed.
It's hard, particularly where you run into situations of opt-in. So, for example, this is true for us with the Visual Studio IDE. You have to opt in to allow us to collect data, and that certainly skews the sampling.
Right.
But I think that the techniques are very applicable. I mean, I have a hard time imagining places where DevOps principles are not good to do. I would turn it around and say, where do you want to work slower? in larger batches with poor time to detect, poor time to remediate, less visibility and
Nowhere.
feedback.
Because I don't see where I would not want continuous integration, continuous testing, continuous I just don't know where I wouldn't want that, right? I have fat client apps that I still maintain, and I run them through the same pipeline I run my web apps to. It's just their final destination is different, right?
Yeah, I would go back and say there may be environmental conditions that you have to clean up in order to get to a DevOps funnel. We mentioned technical debt.
Sure.
So if you do not have clean infrastructure, if you only have snowflaked deployments, so you can't provision environments easily or do infrastructure as code or do PaaS, if you have technical debt in the code with high bug counts and lots of live site incidents and things like that, then you have to clean that up. I would say this is a good example of the maxim, if it hurts, do it more often.
Exactly. Which is interesting because it brings it to the forefront that, oh my God, we need to fix this, right? If I only do it once a year, yeah, I dread it, but I only do it once a year. I have to pay this price every day. We're going to fix this, right? Because I can't afford to pay this every single day. So it's a really good way of saying, hey, just do it, even if it hurts. So that brings me back to a question of, should we automate a bad process, right? If we have a horrible process, should we just start trying to automate it so that we see how bad it is more often? That will encourage us to fix it, or should you fix your process before you try to automate?
You should try to fix your process before you automate, but you should do it incrementally.
Yeah, I tell customers that.
So do it in small batches. I mean, we have, for example, here the idea of planning by epic.
Mm-hmm.
One of our epics is engineering improvements. In engineering improvements, we have a set of North Star metrics, okay, about things like, how quickly we can deploy, how quickly can we run tests, how good we are at live site incident detection and mitigation and so forth.
Right.
And each of those is a metric with a goal. And every sprint, we report progress against those metrics and goals, just like we do on all the customer-facing epics. Now, customers don't see our deployment pipeline. These are things for us.
Sure.
But the point is we plan the engineering improvements on the same process and the same cadence as we do the customer-facing ones.
Right. Yeah, I try to find other places that I can actually apply these processes, right? So I look around like, oh, I haven't seen anyone doing a lot of SharePoint DevOps work, so let me go find out how I can actually apply all these same best practices to SharePoint. Mobile, we're taking that on full force, right, with Hockey App and Xamarin. Instead of saying, where does it not fit, I go out and say, where have I not seen it yet? Right, and let me go see if I can add this value to mobile. Can I add it to SharePoint? Can I add it to ACS? Where can I add more DevOps value versus ever saying, oh, it just doesn't fit there, right? Which is the way I look at it.
I had a customer talking to me about SharePoint last week.
I'm working on it. I have a buddy of mine, Krim, and I are working on it right now. So when I have spare cycles, I have a team project that has all these SharePoint projects in it, and we have the build going right now, and we're about to start pushing it out into both SharePoint hosted and provider hosted applications, so that we can have a nice prescriptive. It's going to basically be a SharePoint extension that says, add this, and then all that SharePoint heartache goes away for you, right? So that's how I look at this question. Is not where is it not a good fit? It's just where have we not done it yet, so I can go do it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well,
Makes
Sam,
sense.
I really do appreciate you taking the time and coming to talk to me and the people who watch the show. I have a feeling they're going to find this very valuable. And if there's any time that you want to come and have another chat with me, you just let me know.
Happy to.
All right. Thanks, guys. Take
Thanks,
care.
Donovan.
See ya.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thanks all.